And joining us now on the debate in Calgary, Alberta, Roger Gibbons of the Canada West Foundation. In Thunder Bay, Ontario, Laure Paquette, political scientist at Lakehead University. In Montreal, Quebec, Adam Difala, senior partner at Mercenaire Strategy Advisors. And here in studio, Bill Graham, former Liberal cabinet minister and MP from 1993 to 2007, and Daniel Draich, acting director of the Robarts Centre for Canadian Studies at York University. And it's great to have you guys here in the studio. And to our friends in Points Beyond, I'm actually going to start by driving Bill Graham crazy, because he's the only person who's actually sat in Parliament here, and I'm going to make him sit there and wait till everybody else has had their first kick at this first question, and then you get to respond.
You got to listen. Question period. It's not answer period. So
that's right. Oh, it's only called question period. I want to start, and Roger Gibbons, let's just go to you first on this, and then we'll go around the metaphorical table, so to speak. I want to start by asking whether you feel there is a sense that our Parliament is less able to govern coherently and unite the country behind a common purpose now than in years past. How true do you think that is, if at all?
I'm not sure it's true. We have a problem right now, or a series of problems related to minority governments, and a particular problem coming out of the Bloc Québécois. So we have some peculiar issues that I think we have to address structurally. But in terms of overall representing diversity in the country, we have a federal system that works reasonably well. We don't have a Senate, an effective Senate, so we're different than other federal states in that way. But I think the most acute problem facing us now is how to deal with the possibility of perpetual minority governments. We'd have no experience on that.
Hold off on that. We're going to get to that as we go along. Laure Paquette, how about your view? Is there a sense that our Parliament is less able to govern coherently now and unite the country behind a big vision, for example?
I think there is always going to be a problem with a Westminster system was built for two parties, and now we've got a substantial block of seats where the leader says that he will not help the government govern. So it's going to be much more difficult to get a majority from here on in, and we've seen that in the past few years.
Adam Difala, what do you say?
I think there is a sense that there's problems with the system, although I'm not entirely sure that they're justified, Steve. We have a Westminster system in this country that, correct as it was just said, is built for two big national parties. But we've had, I think, in my view, a severe lack of imagination and strong leadership at the national level, which has resulted in minority governments and has resulted in the party that's been governing the country not having strong representation in every region of the country. And we've also had a series of secondary problems, the foremost of which is the concentration of power that we've seen in the Prime Minister and in the party leadership. In the old days, people voted for their local MP, but now election campaigns and Canadian politics are much more focused on the leader of the party. And I think that's been a negative thing for our system.
You mentioned no representation in the regions. In Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, the three largest cities in the country, the Conservatives have had 0 seats. That's also another issue. Daniel Draich, how would you answer that opening question?
I think we've gone into a different period, and I think there's been a decline, a marginalization of Parliament as a result. And I think there are probably three principal reasons for this. First, I think the appearance of vote banks, which has regionalized the country. The strategy is that you have to appeal to your vote bank, and this has, I think, eroded the capacity of government to think as a national nation-building force. The second thing, I think, is was always true in the Westminster model, is the problem of translating votes into seats. There's something askew. Here we have a country where almost 2/3 of Canadians vote against the government, and we end up with Harper, who's has been a very tough and rugged minority government, and people don't feel that it represents them, right? So you can say, yes, Westminster model is good on diversity, but in reality, people don't feel connected. And I think the final thing is that there's been a decline of mass political parties. People have a lot of avenues today to be engaged politically on issues that are most important to them. They don't see political parties as doing their job as they did in the past.
Well, as I suggested off the top, the only guy around this table who's actually sat in Parliament now gets to speak. You've been there. What do you think?
Well, I agree with all of the above. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think it depends how you look at this. I came back, I was in Washington on the weekend. The whole country almost fell apart until 11 o'clock at night when they could bring to broker a peace. So a lot depends on how you perceive this. You're saying the Westminster model. well, that suggests what's the alternative? A congressional model? I think the Westminster model has served Canada well and is serving us well for factors I think that Daniel mentioned and others. It has some serious problems at the moment, and the question we have to ask ourselves, are there adjustments to the system that could address those? Would proportional representation go that way? Are there other ways in which we could go to deal with these problems? But I quite agree with those that have said, and we're in the middle of an election campaign, those who think we're going to get a majority government when 50 seats out of 308 are off the table,
The Quebec
this
seats
is
you're
a
talking
very tricky business and quite unlikely to happen. So
let's
what
move
are the, where do we go to try and resolve that issue?
We've heard numerous references to the Westminster model so far, and just to make sure everybody's on the same page, let's do a little history lesson here about where it started and where we're at today. The Westminster model, from the motherland, of course, developed between the 13th and 19th centuries in the UK. The English population, of course, at the time was overwhelmingly white, Christian, and rural when this system was developed. And we have to remember that the right to vote was limited to wealthy male landowners for much, in fact, most of that history. Compare that to where Canada is today. We are a country that is 80% urban. More than 5 million Canadians are members of visible minority groups. The languages spoken at home, well, of course, mostly English, but also French and also non-official languages. And there are, 2% of the Canadians that speak multiple languages. Everyone over the age of 18 can vote if you're a citizen of the country. And, maybe not insignificantly, Canada is 75 times larger than England in terms of land area. And I wonder whether those dissimilarities, Roger Gibbons, mean that this system that we all say works reasonably well in the country, relatively well anyway, just doesn't make sense for such a different country than England today.
But some of the things that have changed do not necessarily indicate problems with the Westminster model. For example, we are a much more ethnically diverse country. It's not clear that that's a complication in terms of the Westminster model. Britain is much more diverse today than it used to be, gets along all right with parliamentary governments. I think we have to be careful that all of the changes that have taken place have not necessarily adversely affected us. The stumbling blocks have been in the past, regional differences and the independent character of Quebec. And the regional differences, I would argue, are relatively modest today compared to what they were in the past.
Laura, is there anything about the Westminster system today that you think is ill-suited to governing and uniting the country that we have here?
Well, I don't see on the horizon any chance of changing, but I think if we had proportional representation instead of what's called first past the post, meaning whoever in a riding gets the most votes is elected, that would make a big difference. And of course, the system works well enough that a really good, strong visionary leader, or preferably several visionary leaders for all of the parties, they can compensate for whatever squeaky wheels we have in the system.
Daniel, that's 2 votes for proportional representation we have on this program, one from Laura and one from you. Do you think that would make a great deal of difference to the way Parliament is perceived?
I think for a lot of ordinary people, they would say, look, this is a system with equity. One vote counts as one vote. There are no wasted votes. That if you get 18% of the votes, as the NDP does, they get 18%, etc. But there's a second issue, and it's not the model per se. It's about the way politics is conducted, which is, I think, precipitated a decline in interest in Parliament. And that is, I think, a much bigger issue. I mean, the model is flexible because I was just in India, for instance, you have adapted Westminster model there for 1.3 billion, which is much more diverse. I mean, we're tiny, we're a pebble on the beach. But the point is, it's about the nature of politics and political life. And I think that it has changed dramatically since the 70s and the 80s, when we had a different notion of how to form a consensus. And it's the inability to form a consensus on big and small issues, big and small, whether it's the environment or pro-poverty policies or competitiveness, which I think lies at the core of the present crisis.
Okay, let me go back to Adam Dufall on this, though, because, again, 2 votes for proportional representation here, suggesting that if you actually saw your vote translated on the floor of the House of Commons in a more direct way, the place would have more legitimacy. You buying that?
Not at all. I agree with what Bill said, which is that the Westminster system is really the best we've got, because the others are the others are worse. It's like what Churchill said about democracy. It's the worst system except for all the others. I mean, the problem with proportional representation, Steve, is that, well, there's many problems with it, but the biggest one in my view is that you destroy that vital link between the elected representative and the geographical constituency or area that they represent. So you end up having a list of people that's submitted by a party, and it becomes a very elite-driven system. I also agree with what Roger said, which is the conventional wisdom is that Canada is a very disparate country and it's very regional, and the regionalism of the country is a bigger problem today than it's ever been. But I don't think that's true. If you think about what, for example, Sir John A. Macdonald or Sir Wilfrid Laurier had to deal with when they were leading political parties at the federal level, we're talking about an era when you could barely communicate from one region to the other. Today we have the internet, we have easily done communications across the country. So I really think it goes back to political leadership, and this has sort of been raised as a theme. But the lack of national vision and the lack of good politics at the federal level that's been able to build a pan-national coalition that unites everybody is the real problem.
I want to pick up on the first thing you said, Adam, and to go to Bill Graham on this, because I want to know, you were elected obviously first past the post.
Right.
You are in Parliament because the largest number of people in your riding put an X beside your name on the ballot. Right. Would you have felt as connected to those electors if simply your name had been high on a list and therefore you got in that way?
Well, I think Adam's raised this point, and I think it's at the core of the problem of the proportional representation system. I remember having this conversation with Mr. Trudeau when I was young, and I said to him, why don't we have proportional representation? We'd have some liberals in the West, there'd be some conservatives in the East. It kind of looked like you'd get a more representative house. And he said, well, the problem is that then you hand even more power to the Prime Minister's office, because who gets to decide who the candidates are? And so, but there are other ways of going about approaching that. The Germans have different systems. I think there are ways you can look at addressing that issue. That's an issue of the mechanics of the system. I think that, going back to Adam's other point, is there's a serious issue here about people getting involved in politics, the tremendously partisan nature of it, and there are a lot of factors in that. And the partisan nature is not just what's going on in the House. It's in the press. It's in the way it is. You look at the American model, which invariably influences us. There are tremendous differences in the way in which politics are conducted today than they were 100 years ago. But that doesn't mean that we have to radically change the system. I mean, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, dirty bathwater every time. We have got to try and figure out how to get better people, and that goes back to Adam's point. If we can't attract good people, we will never have a good parliament. It takes good people to run anything, a university or anything else.
Fair enough, but I do want to revisit this issue of whether or not you'd get more good people if they had the sense that, you know, if you ran for the Greens or for the New Democrats, that your vote actually counted for more than it appears to count for more. And Laura, I'm going to bring this graphic up here. I'm going to ask our director, Michael Smith, to bring it up, and then I want you to comment on it first. Let's pick one province, and you mentioned Alberta, Bill Graham. Alberta, in the 2008 federal election, voted thus. The Conservatives got 27 seats, which represents 96% of the seats in that province. The NDP got 1 seat, which represents 4% of the seats. The Liberals got nothing, and we know the Greens got nothing also. Now take a look at what percentage of the total votes they got in order to achieve those numbers. Flip the next graphics if you would. The Conservatives got just under 65% of the total votes, and yet they got almost all the seats. New Democrats got almost 13% of the votes, and they got 4% of the seats. The Liberals got almost 12% of the votes, got nothing to show for it. The Greens got almost 9% of the votes, and again, nothing to show for it. If we make the direct connection. Laura, is that a problem for you?
Well, yes, I would like people to vote in greater numbers. Our participation rates are going down, and part of the reason is just what you just showed us, which is that first past the post exaggerates the performance of the winning parties and minimizes the contribution of parties that get at the lower end of the percentage of votes. So 65% is a landslide. I mean, 45% in first past the post is a landslide, less than half. So yeah, I would rather have a system where people would feel that their voting makes a difference, and also people have been commenting, oh well, proportional representation isn't good because of a list system. There's lots of different ways of having proportional representation.
So you think you could get around it? I've got to ask Roger Gibbons, you know, there may be a sense in the East that you guys out there are all a bunch of, you know, rodeo attending, beer swilling,
That's enough.
Big C and small c conservatives. Because all the seats, it seems, almost always go all conservative. And of course, we just showed with the total votes that, you know, a third of the people are voting for somebody else, but don't seem to have that voice represented in their provincial legislature or in their federal legislature. What do you say?
Well, you could have done the same graphic for West End Montreal or for downtown Toronto.
That's true.
Exactly. And you would have had the same picture. What we've been pushing for from my end is to seriously look at proportional representation, but to fold that in to a reformed Senate rather than trying to redo the House of Commons in that respect. And one of the reasons for this, and maybe it's not that compelling, but the House of Commons does provide that the purpose of providing a link between individuals and their government. So members of Parliament do all kinds of stuff. It's not about governing, it's about linking constituents, talking to constituents who have problems in one way or another. I think if you pull that out of the system, you have less citizen engagement. So I think, you know, reform the House, try to get it right, talk about proportional representation and build in those creative means into a reformed Senate.
You know, Daniel, we had another great Albertan on this program several months ago, Dan Hayes, who was the government leader in the Senate for the Liberals once upon a time. Bill, I'm sure you know him.
Very well.
And he said, yeah, make the Senate proportionally representative, and that would be, you don't have to mess with the House, and there's a great way to make the Senate A, relevant, and B, more representative. What do you think?
It's a half a solution. It could be, I think Canadians are also very skeptical about the Senate and its unrepresented, unelected, unaccountable nature. It's like something from the 19th century. So if that's the one step. You should have some representativeness.
Progress, though? Would you say
it
it's
is,
progress?
but the deeper problem is the House, because the House ultimately is the assembly of the people, and it is the place of sovereignty. So you have to say, when you put these figures up and you explain this to any group of Canadians, they say it's an unfair system. And I don't think that when we look at other countries that who have adopted PR, that there's a disconnect between the constituency level and the national level. You know, people who stand on lists are well known. The people who run for office serve their time and become well known, and they're on the list, and people vote for the quality of the list, the quality of the leader, and of course the other independent variable, which is the issues. And they want better issues. They want better outcomes.
Let me get Bill Graham on that notion of turning the upper chamber into something more relevant and proportionally representative.
Well, there's some serious problems before you start playing with that. I mean, Prince Edward Island has 6 seats. And 4 seats.
Four.
And
Four seats.
British Columbia has 6. It's not going to help solve the Senate problem by just making it proportionally representation. We're going to have to fix the Senate in terms of, or the British Columbians are going to say, we got nothing to do with this body. It's totally, and the problem with that is Quebec doesn't want to give up and all these things. So this is all moving chairs on the Titanic in a way when you propose that type of a system. The Senate, I agree with Roger, could be a great Canadian institution. It totally lacks legitimacy today for its obvious reasons, but it could be. But it'll take some courage to do that. But may I throw in a suggestion?
Please
here?
do.
Because we talk about proportional representation, and it does have all these problems. What's the matter? Why do we never discuss in Canada the French system? You said it's a shame. I could have been elected with 35% of the votes. Actually, I was lucky enough to get more than 50 most of the time in recent elections.
You run in downtown
But
Toronto. Where
I know
the
I was
Liberals
running,
were
but
very
as Roger said, if I'd been running if I'd been running in Wild Rose, somebody else would have got over 50%.
Exactly.
But the French system addresses that issue, but keeps the merits of a parliamentary direct election. It says if you don't get 50%, you go back, and then people rethink, and they directly choose the person. And the person who comes out has to have more than 50%.
Does that require 2 votes?
Yes.
Yes, on a second vote.
On a second
and
vote.
it's not a bad way of dealing with that particular issue of retaining the integrity of what is good about the Westminster system and the first past the post, but ensuring it has majority representation.
Let me ask Laura Paquette. Humor me for a second, Laura. It's the middle of January, and people in Thunder Bay are going to have to go out to the polls for a second weekend, and it's snowy. What do you think the turnout's going to be that second time round?
Well, depends if it's slush or snow. Slush is always worse. Though I agree in principle that if we had a runoff system, that is to say you vote directly for the Prime Minister, and every person and his dog can run, and then you take the top 2 if nobody gets 50%, and then you vote again, then you wind up with people who feel that they really have an impact on the outcome. The problem is that how do we get to the stage where we can have that kind of reform? We have to open up a whole can of worms to get there, and let's just say I'm not holding my breath.
Not holding your breath. Adam, I guess the bigger question is how much does our current system contribute to the notion that Canada is, you know, in most of the West, very conservative, in most of the East, you know, much more liberal, when in fact, it's a way more checkerboard country than that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think it does. I mean, we keep talking about PR as some sort of a magic bullet that could make things all better, but there are tons of reasons as to why people are disenchanted with the system and why fewer people are voting. And I don't think I've ever met anyone who said that they're not voting in an election because they don't like first past the post and they want PR. There's so many reasons for that. Some people even theorize that it's because people are generally happy with the state of their lives, that the median voter has got 2 cars and their vacation in Florida and they're just not motivated to change anything that badly, so they stay home. There's tons of reasons. The other thing I want to say, Steve, is that people seem to be looking to PR as a way to reduce the regional divides in the country. But think about it. The Bloc gets a very high percentage of the vote in Quebec, usually over 40%. So even under a PR system, they would still get somewhere around half of the seats in the House of Commons from Quebec. So it's a symptom, all these problems. It's not the real problem, which is a larger, overarching national vision issue. And I know I keep coming back to that, but I don't think we're attacking the root of the problem here.
Well, at the risk of beating a dead horse here, let me try one more thing. This is, I'm going to read an excerpt from an IRPP, Institute for Research and Public Policy, document done by Laura Stevenson and Brian Tongay. And Michael, if you would, let's bring up this excerpt. On the one hand, Ontarians who responded to our survey said they did not trust their government and felt that the government was not in touch with the citizens. On the other hand, a majority of these Ontarians reported being satisfied with the state of democracy in the province. There was also little evidence of strong discontent with the electoral system. Only a bare majority supported perfect proportionality between seats and votes. Less than a majority felt that winning a majority of seats without a majority of the popular vote is unacceptable. And majority governments were preferred to minority governments. Now, Roger, let me go to you first on this. You know, Ontarians seem to have indicated they don't like the fractured nature of parliaments under PR. So, given how many different regions and groups and interests and so on there are in our country, do they have a point against reforming it in that way?
Well, you have to remember that people of our community, people who talk about politics all the time, sort of the nattering classes, do their part in exaggerating the regional differences that exist in the country. So, for example, we talk about the West being conservative, Ontario being liberal. Ontario is predominantly conservative, right? Mm-hmm. So, in terms of seats, I think the basic reality is this: there's no strong urge to fundamentally transform the House of Commons. I think people would like to see it work, reformed at the margins in terms of rep by pop. There are better things we can do. But I agree with the survey results. There's no kind of driving desire to transform the House of Commons. The reason that people like me focus on the Senate is because it's defenseless. You can do what you want with the Senate because no one will come to its defense, right? So it's kind of open terrain. We can kick it around, we can transform it, we can do different things. Now, it won't go over well in Quebec. Parliamentary reform of the House of Commons will not go over well in Quebec. Those are realities we just have to face with. And if that's an ultimate stumbling block, if that's a veto, then so be it. But I think there's more room for creativity, if you want, on the Senate side than there is in the House of Commons. Mm-hmm.
Bill Graham, let's check this out. Asking you in a bit of a way here to kind of put the microscope on yourself, but when you were there, did you sense that the House was actually not that bad, that the Senate needed more reform, and that the balance was about right?
Well, certainly the Senate, actually, frankly, being a member of the House, I never wanted to see the Senate reform because I'm very leery about having a very powerful Senate. You see what happens in the United States with a strong Senate and a House of Representatives. It's perpetual deadlock between them. If you look at the constitutional powers of the Senate in the BNA Act, and if they had legitimacy, we would be in a perpetual wrangle, and we don't even have the American system of being able to adjust it the way they do. So there'd be some huge issues that have to be addressed if we're going to reform the Senate. We're going to have a system whereby it doesn't block what the House of Commons and wants to do. So as a member of the House of Commons, I felt it was unfortunate about the Senate, but unless a huge number of things were addressed, the imbalance of seats in British Columbia, the whole issues that I don't think, and for Laura's reason, the appetite for constitutional reform in this country seems to be limited, shall we say, at least in my experience. So I was not that unhappy with that balance. But I do think that I'd like to pick up on what Roger said. There's a tremendous sense, everybody says, well, the West is conservative. It's not. I mean, look at the recent mayoralty campaigns. I mean, look at Calgary elected an Ishmaeli young guy, and Toronto elects Rob Ford. Like, hello, those are the stereotypes would have been completely the complete opposite. They're not. I mean, Canadians are like that. There's all sorts of room, and go back to Adam's point, I think with the right leadership, there's lots of room for things to shift in this country.
Okay, let me pick up on that then. And Laura, go to you first and then Adam. We've been having we've been running this special series all week long on whether politics is broken, and we're really trying to shine a light on whether or not it is the institutions themselves that are in difficulty, or is it the people inside those institutions who are kind of gaming it for their own purposes, not necessarily to the benefit of the country. Do you come down one way or another on that one?
I have to say that the people who are the least enthusiastic about change, apart from the people who don't want to see a constitutional talk start up again, are the people who have a stake in the system. In other words, the politicians who were elected through first past the post to Westminster Parliament, they want a system to stay the same because they have a stake in it. The general population is not well informed about the advantages of proportional representation. We had a referendum in Ontario that was guaranteed to fail because the government who was proposing it didn't put enough money or enough time for the population to get really educated about it. And now we won't talk about it for a generation. So all these people who say there's no driving will in the people, we have to understand that that driving will of the people is manifested through cynicism. When people don't show up to vote, when people don't trust the politicians, it's a sign that there's something wrong, not just with the politicians, but possibly with the system itself.
Adam, which is it, the system, the politicians, or both?
It's both. It's the politicians in the sense that I described earlier, which is a severe lack of national leadership and vision, but it's also the system. And I continue to bring up this point about the leaders of the parties and the way that they're elected. In the old days, MPs had power in the House of Commons. Dare I say, cabinet had power. Today, it's very, very focused on the Prime Minister. We almost have a presidential-style system in a Westminster style of government. And it's very dangerous, and I think it's one of the reasons that government appears so detached from people and why people don't feel empowered, because their local MP doesn't mean anything. And we need to look at ways to change that. One idea is to make the leadership of the party, the election system, something different than what we have now. In Britain, up until recently, it was the caucus, the MPs, that chose the leader. So the leader was directly responsible to them. In our system now, the candidates are picked and dismissed at will, really, by the leader of the party. So we need to do something that would further empower MPs and give people the sense, at least, give voters the sense that their elected representative have actual power in the government.
I think you've all done a great job keeping this away from, overt partisanship. So I'm going to tread close to that line with this next question, Daniel, for you. In the middle of this election campaign, we have seen, I think they're all doing it, but the Conservatives in particular, are really narrow casting their promises to very direct, specific groups. There's something if you're a soccer mom, and there's something for seniors, and there's something for... Anyway, does that contribute to the political fracturing of the country, do you think?
I think to a degree, but I think more important, it pushes politics to the lowest level possible. So it's a gimme proposition, and you're buying votes. And this is combined with the second problem of campaigning, where the leaders go before a hand-picked group of 50 people or 100 people or 200 people. They make a statement, they go away. Well, this is like having a birthday party, having your friends. I mean, what kind of campaigning is that? There's a degradation of the process of politics itself. And people are deeply cynical because they see these photo ops for what they are. Like, they're not a real engagement with the public. And secondly, and the final point would be, issues are marginalized in this process because it's a staged event. So, of course, this is a very big problem.
Bill, do you blame the Prime Minister for doing it that way?
Launching this into a partisan
No,
thing.
I'm trying not to, but
no,
do you
seriously,
blame the
I
leaders for
think
doing
you
it
say
that
the
way?
leaders do it that way. I mean, if one thing we've seen in this campaign, Michael Ignatieff, partly because he has to, has gone the other way and said, I'm getting out of the bubble and I'm going to take the risk, and we'll see what that produces. And if it produces nothing, people are going to say, well, that showed you don't do that way. So we'll see. I think the biggest concern, frankly, is the young people. I mean, was astonished in my own riding trying to get younger people to vote. We know it's around 30% for people under 30. I mean, what is that telling us? Well, to go back to Adam's point, I mean, with better people, I mean, certainly Mr. Obama managed in his campaign to draw out a bigger, younger vote by both modern techniques, but also reaching out to that constituency. We don't seem to be doing that at this time in this country.
Laura, let me ask you about that, because I guess you're probably in touch with younger people more than anybody around the state. You're teaching at a university. Do your students vote?
My students vote, but they're primarily students in political science, and that makes them atypical. I'm perfectly aware that young people don't vote, and one of the reasons why the participation rates I keep talking about keep going down is because there was a cohort, a particular age group that didn't participate, that didn't vote, and then and continues not to vote, and now there's more and more age groups coming behind them who are doing the same things. Thunder Bay itself has a high participation rate, high turnout rate, because we've got the demographics of Victoria. But younger people don't vote, and if they did, the political landscape in Canada would be completely different.
What do your students tell you about reasons why they don't vote for those who don't vote?
There are a range of answers, but a lot of them boil down to it doesn't matter. I had a small group of students do a survey, are you going to vote next time? And basically, I don't see what the point is, was the reply.
Did you get that too, Daniel?
Yes, I do. And students are very engaged. A lot of students are engaged in social media. They're engaged in campaigns around issues. But exactly what Laura said is correct. They say it doesn't matter. All politicians fail to deliver. They talk the talk, they don't walk the walk. And we have to go do other things to be engaged. And that, I think, is a very large crisis. And I think what Bill says is correct. Very low turnout in the under 30 crowd. And I think we'll see this in this election. There'll be no change.
Roger Gibbons, why don't you take the last 30 seconds and give us one idea that might get turnout up, particularly among young people?
Well, I get very frustrated with the notion that there's kind of a great man or a great woman solution to this. We have to look at the institutions we have. We can't sort of sit back and say, if only we had the great leaders of the past, if only we had the John Diefenbakers and Mackenzie Kings of the past. I think that's a disservice to Canadians. We've got to fix what we can fix, its institutions, and not sort of dream about a utopian leader who's going to suddenly draw all of Canadians into a consensual political discourse. That's not what this country is about. It's not what it's going to be about.
Because after all, Bill Graham is just not going to make that comeback, is he? No, it's just not on.
No.
But I agree with Roger. We want to have good MPs, and we want to encourage members of Parliament and citizens to run for their Parliament. It's important.
She's giving me the hook. We got to go. Roger Gibbons from the Canada West Foundation, Laura Paquette from Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Adam Difala, co-author, Rescuing Canada's Right, and the senior partner at Mercenaire Strategy Advisors. Thanks all three of you for being there on the line for us. And here in our studios, Bill Graham on the right-hand side of the screen, the former Foreign Minister, Defence Minister, MP from 93 to 07, and Daniel Draich, Acting Director of the Robarts Centre for Canadian Studies at York. Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.